We're going to have a presentation by Suzanne Goode, first a 5-minute video of her presentation in 2001 to the then City Council of Malibu of the Malibu Lagoon Task Force recommendations for the restoration and recovery of the heart of Malibu's dysfunctional ecosystem. And afterwards, Suzanne's going to bring you up to date with what the history was that is not in the video and answer any questions you may have.
Moment, I don't see any of the homeowners out here. In fact, it looks like it's pretty well deserted out here. I believe some of the people, just picked up most of their belongings and just kind of went to higher grounds because this Malibu Creek, it used to be a creek now. It's just a roaring rapid river out here. We're just flying over Malibu Country Mart, and that's the business area that you saw that was being inundated with water out here.
This occurred about 18 years ago. The same thing happened where a number of businesses were lost in this area because they got 2 or 3 feet of water and sewage spill came through the stores.
The first part of my presentation that I'll go into are recommendations for lagoon and wetlands restoration, and that first one is divided into 2 options. The first objective that we had was to restore as much of the historic lagoon habitat in the lagoon area as possible. The lagoon is much smaller than it used to be, and it's being made to handle much more water than it used to in pristine times, or before we brought imported water into the watershed and before the lower Malibu Creek area was developed. And this has created a lot of problems for the ecosystem, not just in terms of public health and water quality, but also with problems of more an environmental nature and habitat nature. So the first objective was to restore as much of the lagoon as possible. And we have long-term high-priority recommendation. And that is to restore and reconnect sites A1, A2, and A3. I must preface by saying this is all predicated upon there being willing sellers of these private properties. So we're not proposing to do anything that the landowner would not want. The landowner must sell the property first, obviously. The public already owns Site A1, and that is the restored lagoon that was done in 1983. However, it doesn't really function as well as it should. And to really make that lagoon function and approximate what its original size would be, we really feel that it's necessary to eventually acquire, when the seller becomes willing, Sites A2, which is the golf course, and Site A3, which is the empty lot across from the Chevron station. We envision that as being the the extent that the lagoon should have. So that's a long-term, high-priority recommendation. That's Objective 1, restore historic natural lagoon. Objective 2 is to create wetlands that are capable of treating urban runoff and or excess creek flows. As we all know, the upper watershed is becoming more and more developed, and with that comes excess and additional runoff, and that runoff carries urban pollutants. And so we recognize that there is a need to have some kind of treatment wetlands, hopefully in the Civic Center area, that would treat this runoff before it enters into the lagoon. This does not preclude the option of establishing habitat in these areas as well. So you could have treatment wetlands that also function as habitat. The first long-term high-priority recommendation is to create an interconnected series of constructed treatment wetlands in sites C2 and C3. On the map, site C2 is the famous chili cook-off site, and site C3 are the 3 empty properties surrounding the City Hall. So it says C3 above the City Hall, but it also includes the properties to the east and to the west. These sites could be linked up, and when water is brought into them and some of the fill removed, could be recreated as treatment wetlands to help remove some of the pollutants before being connected into the lagoon, which hopefully would include sites A2 and A3. The first step would be to initiate a study to identify the most cost-effective combination of wetlands projects, and the desired result is the highest level of nutrient and pathogen removal from storm flows and or creek flows before entrance to the lagoon and surf rider beach. And for wetland projects that are considered equal in the cost-benefit analysis, projects that create or enhance wildlife habitat would be favored. And I would like to point out that we achieved a lot of agreement Obviously, we hope that some of the sellers will become willing sellers in these properties. We feel it's very, very important to realize that we have only one Malibu Lagoon, and it's a very important habitat. And we hope that we'll have the opportunity to implement some of these restoration and treatment wetland strategies in the future. And just to show you that there are much more extreme things that were discussed, one of the items that was discussed but not addressed in these recommendations was actually moving the part of the shopping center that is adjacent to B1 out of harm's way. Obviously, it would have to be with the agreement of the landowners, and we don't see this as something that will happen immediately. However, it is quite obvious that the creek is moving in that direction, and rather than see continuing channelization and riprap and concreting of the channel, some members of the task force propose that perhaps the building should be moved so that the creek can do what it wants to do.
Interesting. Could have a 100-year flood this winter. Who knows what will happen? Suzanne and I were talking outside about the video, and she remarked that there was something she felt was in the original video, and I still haven't found it yet. I'm still looking, but it's a key issue. You want to get into it? And
Sure. Do you want me to come up there, or should I?
that's good there.
How do you
That
turn it?
microphone works. It's alive.
It is? It's live now? Oh, great. I don't have to worry about it. What I had hoped was in the video was the actual short-term recommendations, which is the project that we're doing right now. Had a very long history, which I'm about to tell you, and 100% consensus of all the stakeholders that were involved, including the people that sued us. So I thought it would have been great to have that in a video, and I know it must exist somewhere, but unfortunately it's not in this one. As you know, what I referred to in this video was the 1983 restoration. Prior to that, that whole area that is now the lagoon and the golf course and the dirt lot that's opposite the old Chevron station was filled in over a period of decades by Caltrans and others, so that it no longer appeared to be a wetland. And in the people's memories who had lived here, it was always just a flat expanse of basically nothing, of filled dirt and weeds. State Parks purchased the property in, I believe, the late 70s and decided to do a restoration project there and return some of the wetland function to the area. And that project occurred in 1983 before I started working here, but I started in 1989 when it was still pretty new. And at that time, we recognized that it wasn't functioning very well. Over the years, the measurements that we took, we began to have fewer and fewer benthic invertebrates, less species diversity, problems with low dissolved oxygen and high nutrients and accumulation of sediments. And that was recognized as early as just a few years after the 1983 project. The 1983 project graded 3 parallel channels that are perpendicular to the main channel of the lagoon and created the Bridges Path, which was really more of an amenity for humans rather than something that was going to help the lagoon to function very well. And it was a successful project in as much as it did bring in some wetland habitat and wildlife habitat, where before there had just been a big lot of basically myoporum and a few salt bushes. There were Little League fields there too. A lot of people used to play baseball there. So that project was done in '83, but as I say, as early as 1989 or even before, we began to recognize that it really wasn't functioning very well. Bob alluded to the formation of what later became known as the Malibu Creek Watershed Council, and we had our first meeting at the library here in Malibu, and Madeline Glickfeld was the chair of that, and Bob became involved early on. And we got professional facilitation services, and we had 2 facilitators that actually came from out of state and worked with us for over a year. We had a lot of stakeholders from private organizations, from governmental entities, and we came up with 111 action items that were later boiled down to 44 action items. And it's amazing to go back and look at those and see that we actually accomplished a lot. I mean, Bob talked about the stream team with Mark and with Matt, and all of the work that's been done over the years. It's really 20 years has gone by like nothing, and we really have accomplished a lot. The facilitated meetings did reveal that we needed to do something about Malibu Lagoon and about the health of the people that were recreating in the ocean and about the health of the wildlife. But we still hadn't come up with a concrete and detailed recommendation on the lagoon. We felt we needed more information. So the Coastal Conservancy paid for UCLA, and Dr. Richard Ambrose is here this evening, and Dr. Anthony Orm to actually head a team of scientists that did a baseline study of Malibu, Lower Malibu Creek and Malibu Lagoon. So they looked at riparian habitat, they looked at coastal processes, coastal geomorphology, public health issues, coastal salt marsh issues, and really painted a picture of past geological history of the lagoon and current conditions. And in the end of that study, was known as the UCLA study, produced in 2000, was a matrix that had a series of restoration options that could be undertaken in the lower watershed and in the lagoon. And it was really quite a great banquet of things to choose from. And some of the things would go together naturally, some of the options, and other things were mutually exclusive, so you couldn't really do them all. Things like bring creek flows into the Civic Center area and treat them, reconfigure the lagoon, many recommendations, purchase certain properties and so forth. So we saw the need to have a second round of professional facilitation, and this lasted for another year and was paid for by the Southern California Association of Governments, and we brought in another professional facilitator. And this time we were actually much more formal, and we set up ground rules, and we decided which stakeholders would be necessary and which stakeholders would be desirable to come up with choosing amongst these restoration options that were put forth by the UCLA team. And we met 12 times, once a month for a year, and it was rather grueling because we went over and over and over. We had subcommittees, we got back into the big committee, and in the end, we came down with a series of unanimous recommendations. And that's what I was hoping had been in the video. I know there must be somewhere in the bowels of City Hall maybe a video of this, and I'd love to dig it out. If somebody wants to put some time into that, that would be great. The recommendations were to reconfigure the channels of the Malibu Lagoon because of the fact that the artificial channels that state parks put in were perpendicular to the main channel of the lagoon, which is not very natural. The fact that that pathway with the bridges went straight through the habitat and created pinch points so that water could never really get into the back channels and scour it out during open conditions very well, and had contributed to an accumulation of about 1 inch per year of heavily nutrient-laden sediments that were contributing to excess submerged aquatic vegetation and algae. A little bit is good, too much is not so good, and leading to low dissolved oxygen situation in the water column and in the mud, and further exacerbating the loss of biodiversity. So we decided that this needed to change, and the group unanimously agreed to this. We had representatives from the City of Malibu, from the Sierra Club, from the Audubon Society, from, as I say, the two individuals that led the charge against the project, unanimous agreement that this is what needed to be done, and we were directed to seek funding and do a study and come up with a plan and do the project. And so the rest is really, well, what I've been telling you is history, but as you say, the rest is history. That's exactly what we did. We went and got funding. We had public meetings, first of all. We had, in addition to the Lagoon Task Force, after we made our findings, which I presented that night in 2001, then we had a Lagoon Working Group, which had the same stakeholders that were in the Lagoon Task Force, but even expanded out to include anybody that wanted to be involved. I believe we had 4 or 5 meetings of those. And then we selected a scientific advisory committee that consisted of, again, Dr. Ambrose and then other experts, Kimball Garrett from the Natural History Museum, Andy Brooks, Dr. Gerhardt from up in Arcata, 6 very, very well-known people with expertise specifically in wetlands and wetland wildlife. And then we hired a consulting firm. We came up with a lagoon feasibility study, And we further kept refining this over a period of years, literally since 2001 up until 2 years ago. We spent planning and refining and working on the project. Our funding did get interrupted for a while because all the state bond funds got frozen, so we kind of went dark for about a year or two while we couldn't spend any money to go further with what we were planning. And then we finally were able to release our EIR in, was it 2005? And it was not challenged by anyone, so we got over that hurdle. And then in 2010, we got our coastal permit and were then hit with our lawsuit. The petitioners were able to delay the project for a year by getting a stay. And in October of 2011, it all begins to bleed together after a while. We won the lawsuit, and the judge lifted the stay immediately. As a matter of fact, he ruled from the bench, which is very unusual. Usually judges take things under consideration, and they think about it for a couple weeks, and they come out with a decision. But he had his decision ready. We won. Then the petitioners decided to file appeal with the Court of Appeals, and then at the late moment in time, about a couple of weeks before we were ready to begin this project, we were ready to begin on June 1st, the appeals court denied to issue a stay, so we were ready to go. And so ever since June 4th, we've been working on the project, and Mark will fill you in on the details of that, but it's been a very, very long slog. And I feel that my 22-year career so far with state parks has spent more time and energy on that one little park down there than on the rest of the 40,000 acres that I have to manage combined. And but it's been worth it, and it's really exciting. And Mark will show you the details of the project that we're now working on, and will be available to answer questions after that.
Very good.